You're sitting there, waiting. Maybe it's been days, maybe weeks since the last conflict. You know something happened between you two. You know it mattered. And somewhere deep down you have this feeling that they know it too. But instead of an apology, instead of that conversation you've been replaying in your mind 1,000 times, there's just silence. Radio silence. Avoidance. And the worst part is, you're not even entirely sure what you're waiting for anymore. Are you waiting for them to come back? Are you waiting for them to explain themselves? Or are you waiting for some kind of acknowledgement that what they did was wrong and that it hurt you? If you're watching this, there's a good chance you've been in a relationship with someone avoidant. Or maybe you still are. And if you have, you know this feeling intimately, that maddening, heartbreaking cycle where something goes wrong and instead of working through it together, they disappear. They go silent. They make themselves unavailable. And you're left there, holding all the emotional weight, all the confusion, all the pain by yourself. It becomes a lonely place to be, because not only are you dealing with the original hurt, but now you're also dealing with the rejection of not being met where you are. But here's what I want you to know today, before we go any deeper into this. There's something happening on the other side of that silence. There's something in your avoidant partner's internal landscape that you might not be seeing. And understanding it won't make what they did okay. It won't erase your pain, but it might help you understand that their silence isn't always about not caring. Sometimes it's about being absolutely terrified. And I want to walk you through that today, because I think you deserve to understand not just what's happening to you, but what's happening to them. And more importantly, I want you to understand what this means for your own healing. The fear beneath the surface. Let's start with something that might seem contradictory, something that doesn't quite make sense from where you're sitting. The avoidant person who hurt you, they probably do want to apologize. I know that's hard to believe. I know it feels impossible when you're staring at silence, when you're staring at someone who seems completely unmoved by what they did. But the avoidant attachment pattern isn't about not caring. It's about caring so much, about being so afraid of rejection and abandonment, that the person actually becomes paralyzed. They freeze. And that freeze happens before the apology. It happens at the moment where they would have to say, I was wrong, and I hurt you, and I'm sorry. Because what an apology requires, what it demands from someone with avoidant attachment, is the very thing they've spent their entire life running from. It requires vulnerability. It requires them to acknowledge that they have the power to hurt someone they care about. It requires them to stand there, exposed and undefended, and wait for your response. It requires them to risk rejection after being vulnerable. And for someone with avoidant attachment, that is absolutely terrifying. You see, avoidant attachment develops early. It comes from a place where a child learned, usually quite young, that their emotions weren't safe. Maybe their parents were dismissive when they cried. Maybe vulnerability was met with shame or criticism. Maybe they learned that the way to survive emotionally was to not need anyone, to be self-sufficient, to handle everything alone. And so they built walls, beautiful, protective walls that kept them safe from being hurt, from being rejected, from having their needs go unmet. And those walls have served them. They've gotten them through life. But they've also kept them isolated, even in relationship. So when an avoidant person hurts someone they care about, something very specific happens inside them. First, there's usually genuine remorse. There's a part of them that knows what they did was wrong, that knows you're hurt, that knows they're responsible. But that knowledge, that acknowledgement of wrongdoing, activates shame. And shame is one of the most painful emotions a human being can feel. It's not just feeling bad about what you did. It's feeling bad about who you are. It's that deep internal sense that you're fundamentally flawed, that you're not good enough, that you've confirmed your worst fears about yourself. And here's where the freeze happens. Here's where the avoidance kicks in. Because once that shame is activated, the avoidant person's instinct is to do what they've always done. Escape, run, create distance. They think, maybe not consciously, but they think, if I go silent, if I don't talk about it, if I create enough distance between us, maybe it will go away. Maybe I won't have to feel this shame. Maybe I won't have to face the fact that I hurt someone. Maybe I won't have to stand there vulnerable and risk them deciding I'm not worth being with. The spiral of self-protection. What happens next is a spiral that can last for days, weeks, or even months. The avoidant person creates distance. They become unavailable. And in their mind, they're protecting themselves. But what they don't realize, or what they push down, is that they're also building a stronger wall between themselves and the person they hurt. And as the silence stretches on, shame turns into something else. It turns into anger at themselves. It turns into a story they tell themselves. A story where you're too sensitive, or too demanding, or too much. It's a narrative that allows them to deflect from their own responsibility, because looking at their own responsibility means looking at the shame. And the shame is unbearable. But underneath that anger, underneath that deflection, there's genuine remorse. There's a part of them that knows they want to make it right. There's a part of them that cares about you, that misses you, that wants to repair the breach. But that part is buried so deep, trapped under layers of fear and shame and self-protection, that they can't access it. Not easily, not without help. Not without feeling like they're going to fall apart. This is the fundamental trap of avoidant attachment in relationships. The avoidant person hurts someone. They feel ashamed. Their response to shame is to run. So they create more distance. And the more distance they create, the more the people they care about feel abandoned and rejected. And so the dynamic gets worse. The person who was hurt feels increasingly alone and unsupported. The avoidant person feels increasingly trapped and ashamed. And nobody is actually getting what they need. What makes it even more painful is that the avoidant person's fear of your response is often rooted in something very real. They're not just making it up. If you're watching this, I'm guessing you've been hurt. I'm guessing you've expressed that hurt to them, or you want to. And I'm guessing that expression of your pain, your anger, your disappointment feels to them like the ultimate rejection. Not because you're being unreasonable, but because for them, any sign that they've hurt you or disappointed you in any way can feel like the beginning of the end. It can feel like the moment you're going to leave them. It can feel like confirmation of their worst fear, that they're not worth loving. So when they think about apologizing, when they think about that conversation where they acknowledge what they did and see the pain in your eyes as a result, they're not just thinking about a difficult conversation, they're thinking about the moment you realize you should leave them. They're thinking about being abandoned, and that fear is so powerful, so all-consuming, that it becomes easier to just not have the conversation at all. It becomes easier to pretend it didn't happen, to distract themselves, to focus on anything else. Because as long as they're not having that conversation, they're not risking that abandonment. The neurobiology of avoidant fear, I want to go a bit deeper into the physical reality of what happens in an avoidant person's nervous system when they're faced with the need to apologize. Because this is important. This isn't just about feelings or thoughts. This is about how their body is wired. When an avoidant person realizes they need to apologize, their nervous system perceives the situation as a threat. Not a metaphorical threat, but a real physiological threat. Their fight, flight, freeze response gets activated. And because they learned early on that fleeing was the safest option, their nervous system goes into freeze or flight mode. The body literally floods with stress hormones. Their heart rate might increase. They might feel physically nauseous. And their instinct, deeply embedded in their nervous system, is to get away from that sensation. So they don't do it consciously, usually. They're not thinking, I'm going to avoid this conversation to protect myself. Their body is literally hijacking their ability to move toward you. They might find themselves suddenly busy at work. They might feel an overwhelming urge to go to the gym, or to hang out with friends, or to focus on a project. They might feel physically ill when they think about having the conversation. And all of these are genuine symptoms of their nervous system being in threat response mode. This doesn't excuse the behavior, it's not a free pass. But it explains why logic doesn't work. It explains why you can't just tell them, look, just apologize and we can move forward. Because their system isn't operating on logic right now. It's operating on survival mode. And getting them out of that mode requires either time, professional help, or a significant relational consequence that makes the cost of avoiding higher than the cost of facing. Understanding without excusing. Now, I want to be very clear about something here. Understanding why someone avoids apologizing is not the same as excusing them for avoiding apologizing. The avoidant person's fear is real. The shame is real. The paralysis is real. But your pain is also real. Your need to be acknowledged is also real. Your right to have that conversation is also real. You don't have to absolve them of responsibility because now you understand their internal struggle. That's not what this is about. What this is about is you getting clarity. What this is about is you not being left wondering if they care, if they feel bad, if they think what they did was wrong. Because the answer is often yes to all of those things, and you deserve to know that. You deserve to understand that their silence isn't always a reflection of their feelings for you. Sometimes it's a reflection of how much they're struggling internally, how much they're trapped in their own fear. But here's the thing that's equally important, and this is where I want to really speak to you directly. Understanding their struggle does not mean you have to wait forever for an apology. Understanding their struggle does not mean you have to organize their emotional growth for them. Understanding their struggle does not mean you have to make space for their avoidance at the expense of your own healing. Because what tends to happen is this. Someone gets hurt by an avoidant person, they learn about avoidant attachment, they start to feel compassion for the avoidant person's fear and shame, and then they become locked in a different kind of pattern. They become locked in a pattern of waiting, of being patient, of making space for the avoidant person to come around, to process, to finally be ready to have the conversation. And week after week, month after month, they're waiting, they're holding space. They're managing the avoidant person's emotions around the conflict, all while their own need for repair and acknowledgement goes unmet. This is not your job, this is not your responsibility. The internal conflict that matters most, so let's talk about what's actually happening inside the avoidant person more specifically. Because there are layers to this, and I think it's important you understand them. First, there's the immediate shame response. The moment they realize what they did, or in the moments after the conflict escalated, there's a hit of shame. This is the feeling where they want to crawl out of their own skin. And it's so uncomfortable, so intolerable, that they immediately look for an escape route. And the escape route is distance. They pull back, they become less available. Maybe they claim they need space. Maybe they go quiet. Maybe they throw themselves into work or hobbies or anything that isn't the relationship or the conflict. But here's something really important to understand. This shame is different from guilt. Guilt is saying, I did something bad. Shame is saying, I am bad. And that's a crucial distinction. Someone who feels guilty can usually work through it. They can acknowledge what they did, take responsibility, make amends. But someone in shame is defending their sense of self. They're in survival mode, protecting their ego from the feeling that they're fundamentally flawed or unlovable. Underneath that, there's the fear of confrontation. The avoidant person has often learned, somewhere in their past, that confrontation is dangerous. That vulnerability in the face of someone else's anger or disappointment is dangerous. That standing still while someone expresses hurt toward them is unbearable. So they've learned to avoid it. To avoid the conversation entirely. To avoid the moment where they have to stand there and hear, fully and clearly, how much they hurt someone. Because if they hear it fully, if they really let it land, then the shame becomes even more acute. Then they have to really see the damage they've caused. And that's almost too much to bear. There's also a deeper layer, and this one is crucial. There's the fear that if they apologize, if they acknowledge what they did and show up vulnerably to repair it, and if that repair attempt isn't received well, or if it isn't enough, or if you decide you don't forgive them, then they've made themselves completely defenseless. They've removed the armor of their avoidance, and they've made themselves available for rejection. And for someone with avoidant attachment, rejection feels like annihilation. It feels like proof that they were right all along, that they're not worth loving, that they should have kept their walls up. So the apology becomes this impossible thing. It becomes this moment where they have to risk their entire sense of self, their entire identity as someone who is self-sufficient and doesn't need anyone. Because if you reject that apology, if you're still hurt, if you're still angry, then they've failed not just at the apology, but at their own self-worth. And that's too much for them to risk. But here's what's so important for you to understand. This is their struggle, not yours. Yes, it explains their behavior. Yes, it helps you understand that it's not about you not being worthy of an apology. But it doesn't obligate you to wait for them to work through it. It doesn't mean you have to organize your healing around their fear. What they actually want to say. If the avoidant person in your life could access the part of themselves beneath all this fear and shame, what would they want to say to you? It would probably be something like this. I know I hurt you. I know what I did was wrong. I feel terrible about it. I'm ashamed of myself, and I'm so scared that you're going to hate me because of it. I'm scared that you're going to see me clearly now, see the ways I messed up, see the ways I hurt the people I care about, and you're going to realize I'm not worth being with. I'm scared that if I fully acknowledge what I did and what it cost you, you're going to leave. And I can't stand the thought of that. So instead of facing it, instead of having the conversation, I'm running. I'm creating distance. I'm acting like it doesn't matter. Because if it doesn't matter, maybe I don't have to feel this shame. Maybe I don't have to risk losing you. That's what's happening. That's the internal conflict. The genuine remorse, the real care, the authentic desire to repair, are all there, but they're buried under so much fear that the avoidant person can't access them, can't articulate them, can't move toward you. So they move away instead. And they stay away because the longer they stay away, the more they convince themselves that leaving you eventually will hurt less than staying and risking rejection. The viewer's perspective, what you need to know. But we need to shift now, because this isn't really about them. This is about you. This is about you sitting with the silence, sitting with the unanswered questions, sitting with the hurt that hasn't been acknowledged. And I need you to understand something really important. The fact that they're struggling doesn't mean your pain isn't real. The fact that they're scared doesn't mean your hurt isn't valid. The fact that they care about you underneath all that fear doesn't mean they've treated you well. And the fact that you understand their struggle doesn't mean you have to accept treatment that damages you. You might be waiting for an apology. You might be waiting for them to come to you, to acknowledge what happened, to say that they're sorry, and to ask what they can do to repair things. And that's a legitimate thing to need. It's not dramatic, it's not needy, it's not too much. You deserve to be acknowledged when you've been hurt. You deserve to have someone take responsibility for their actions. You deserve to know that the person you care about understands the impact of what they did. But here's the thing that I want you to sit with. How long are you willing to wait? How long are you willing to hold space for someone else's emotional processing while your own needs go unmet? Because there's a point, and only you can define where that point is, where waiting becomes staying in a situation that's damaging to you. There's a point where understanding becomes enabling. There's a point where compassion for their struggle becomes a reason to abandon compassion for yourself. The empowerment of holding your ground. I want to talk about what it looks like to hold your ground here. What it looks like to understand the avoidant person's struggle while also protecting your own heart. First, it means that you don't have to manage their emotions around the conflict. You don't have to pretend the conflict didn't happen. You don't have to make it easier for them by letting it go silently. You also don't have to orchestrate a conversation when they're not ready. You don't have to do the emotional labor of getting them to the point where they can acknowledge their responsibility. But you can express your needs clearly. You can say, I'm hurt. I need to talk about what happened. I need you to take responsibility for your part. I need to know where you stand in this relationship. And then you wait for their response. Not forever, but you make your need clear. Second, it means that you develop what I think of as an emotional immunity to their avoidance. This is hard work, but it's so necessary. It means that when they go silent, when they create distance, when they make themselves unavailable, you remind yourself that it's not about you, it's about their struggle. And you continue to take care of yourself. You continue to invest in your own healing. You continue to build a life that's worth living, regardless of whether they show up the way you need them to. Third, it means that you set boundaries around how long you're willing to wait and how much space you're willing to give. You can say, I love you and I understand you're struggling, but I also need repair. I need acknowledgement. If you're not able to give that to me in the time frame I need, then we need to reconsider how we're going to move forward together. And you mean it. You're not using it as a threat or manipulation. You're being honest about what you need and what you can and can't accept in a relationship. Fourth, it means that you recognize that healing doesn't require their apology. This is huge. You've been waiting maybe for their apology to give yourself permission to heal. You've been thinking that once they acknowledge what they did and say they're sorry, then you can move forward. But you don't have to wait for that. You can grieve what happened. You can acknowledge how they hurt you. You can decide what you're willing to accept going forward. You can heal all of that without their permission and without their apology. This doesn't mean being cold or cutting them off necessarily. It means building a life and a sense of self that isn't dependent on getting what you need from someone who is structurally incapable of giving it right now. The possibility of change. Now, it's important to note that avoidant people can change. Growth is possible. They can learn to sit with shame instead of running from it. They can learn to apologize. They can learn to repair relationships. But this change has to come from them. It has to come from their own recognition that their patterns are causing problems. It has to come from their own choice to do the difficult work of examining their attachment style and learning something different. And this change rarely happens because someone else is waiting for them to change. It often happens when someone who is avoidant experiences a consequence. A serious one, a consequence that makes it clear that running doesn't work anymore. That avoidance is costing them something they actually value. That they can't keep doing this and keep the relationship they want. Sometimes that consequence is you leaving. Sometimes it's you saying, I'm not willing to be in a relationship with someone who won't take responsibility or repair harm. And sometimes when someone hears that from a person they care about, it jolts them into a different place. Suddenly, they're not just dealing with shame. They're dealing with the actual loss of the person they care about. And sometimes, that loss is a big enough mirror for them to see what their avoidance is costing them. But I'm not telling you to do that hoping that it will change them. I'm telling you about it because I want you to understand that you have the power here. You have the power to decide what you're willing to accept. You have the power to set boundaries. You have the power to walk away if you need to. And sometimes that power, that willingness to actually follow through on your own needs, is what opens the door for them to change. But your job is never to make them change. Your job is to take care of yourself. The waiting game's hidden cost. Let me speak directly to the cost of waiting. Because if you're still in this situation, if you're still holding space for them, if you're still hoping that they'll come around and finally apologize and finally acknowledge and finally show up, I want you to understand what this is costing you. It's costing you your peace. Peace is not the absence of conflict or the absence of problems. Peace is the sense that you're being heard, that your needs matter, that you're in relationship with someone who is willing to work on things alongside you. When you're waiting for an apology that isn't coming, waiting for repair that isn't happening, waiting for acknowledgement that they're not offering, you're not in peace. You're in limbo. You're in a state of suspended animation where you can't fully grieve the hurt because you're still hoping they'll make it right. You can't fully move forward because you're still connected to this unresolved thing. You're stuck. It's costing you your sense of agency. When you're waiting for someone else to show up emotionally, when you're managing their emotions around the conflict, when you're organizing your healing around their timeline, you're giving your power away. You're saying, my healing is dependent on what you do or don't do. And that's a losing game, because you're not in control of what they do. You're only in control of what you do. And every day you spend waiting for them to make a move is a day you're not making your own move toward healing. It's costing you your sense of self-worth. Because as the silence stretches on, you start to internalize it. You start to think, if they cared about me, they would want to repair this. If I was important enough, they would work through their shame and come apologize. And you make it mean something about you. You make it mean that you're not worth the vulnerability required to apologize. You make it mean that they don't care. And neither of those things is necessarily true. But the longer you wait, the more likely you are to start believing them. It's costing you your time and your energy. Time you could be spending on people who do show up for you. Energy you could be putting toward your own growth and healing. Time and energy are precious, finite resources. And when you're giving them to someone who isn't meeting you halfway, you're impoverishing the other areas of your life. The truth about their fear and your strength. Here's something I want you to know deep in your bones. The fact that they're scared to apologize, the fact that they're terrified of your response, the fact that they're paralyzed by shame, those things don't make them weak. But they also don't make them right. They don't make it okay for them to hurt you and then go silent. They don't make it acceptable for them to let you sit in confusion and pain while they process privately. And here's what else I want you to know. Your ability to understand their fear, to see beneath their avoidance, to recognize their struggle, that's not a weakness either. It's a strength. It's an emotional intelligence. It's a capacity for empathy. But, and this is critical, but a strength used in service of enabling someone else's dysfunction is no longer a strength. It becomes a liability. It becomes something that actually works against you. So the question becomes, how do you take this strength, this ability to see beneath the surface, and direct it toward yourself? How do you use that same emotional intelligence to understand what you need? How do you use that same empathy to care for yourself the way you've been caring for them? Because here's the truth. You can understand why someone is avoidant and still decide that avoidance is a deal breaker for you. You can recognize that their shame is real and still refuse to take responsibility for managing it. You can see their struggle and still choose to take care of yourself first. These things are not mutually exclusive. What an avoidant apology actually looks like. Now, let's talk about something really important. If and when your avoidant person does find their way to apologizing, you need to know what you're actually looking at. Because an avoidant apology is often different from what you might be expecting. And if you don't understand that difference, you might miss it entirely. Or worse, you might receive it in a way that doesn't actually help either of you heal. An avoidant apology often comes very suddenly. After weeks or months of silence, suddenly they're there. And it might come in a text, it might come in person. It might come wrapped in a lot of explanations about why they did what they did. They might say something like, "I'm sorry I've been distant. I was struggling with my own stuff." Or, "I'm sorry I hurt you. I didn't realize how much this mattered to you." Notice what's different about these apologies compared to what you might have needed to hear. Real acknowledgement in an avoidant apology often comes with caveats. There's usually an explanation for why they did the thing they're apologizing for. They're not just saying, "I was wrong and I hurt you." They're saying, "I was wrong because I was dealing with this other thing and I didn't realize you would take it this way." There's a softening of responsibility, an implicit suggestion that the situation was complicated, that they didn't fully understand what they were doing, that there were extenuating circumstances. And here's the thing, sometimes there are extenuating circumstances. Sometimes they were genuinely struggling and their behavior was a symptom of that struggle. And it's okay to acknowledge that. But a genuine apology also needs to include a clear ownership of the impact, regardless of the circumstances. It needs to say, "Whatever I was going through, I hurt you, and that's on me. I'm sorry for that impact." Another hallmark of an avoidant apology is that it often comes with a kind of urgency or intensity. They might show up and be very warm, very available, very focused on reconnection. And there's often an unspoken subtext, "Please accept this apology so we can move past this." There's pressure, maybe not intentional, but pressure nonetheless, for you to forgive quickly and to move forward. Because the longer the apology conversation lasts, the longer they're sitting in that vulnerable space, and that's unbearable for them. So there's a rush to resolution. And sometimes they apologize and then immediately create distance again. They've done the thing they were terrified to do, they've made themselves vulnerable, and now they need to retreat and rebuild their walls. So you get an apology and then suddenly they're distant again. And you're left wondering, did they mean it? Have we actually repaired this? Understanding what you're actually receiving. So when an avoidant person apologizes, I want you to ask yourself a few clarifying questions. Not to judge them harshly, but to understand what you're actually receiving and whether it's enough for you. Are they taking responsibility for their specific actions and their impact, separate from explaining why they acted that way? There's a difference between "I was stressed and took it out on you, and that was unfair to you," and "I was stressed and that's why I acted that way." The first takes responsibility. The second explains behavior without necessarily owning the impact. Are they asking you what you need to feel safe and repaired, or are they telling you what they think you should need? An avoidant person might apologize and then minimize what they did, or suggest that you should be able to move past it now. A genuine apology includes curiosity about what would actually help you heal. Are they making promises about what they'll do differently, or are they just expressing remorse about the past? Words matter here. "I'm sorry" is different from "I'm sorry and here's what I'm going to do differently the next time." The second one commits to change. The first one is just an expression of regret. Is the apology coming with an expectation that you immediately forgive and move on, or are they creating space for you to process in your own time? Real repair takes time. If they're apologizing and then expecting everything to be fine immediately, they're not actually honoring your healing process. How to receive an avoidant apology without reopening the wound. Okay, so let's say your avoidant person does apologize. Let's say after all this time, they finally find their way to you and they say something that approximates an apology. How do you receive that in a way that actually helps you heal, that allows you to move forward, without opening up all the pain again? First, I want you to know that you don't have to accept an apology just because it's being offered. You get to evaluate it, you get to ask clarifying questions, you get to say, "That's a start, but I need more clarity on this specific thing." You don't have to rush to forgiveness. You don't have to put a neat little bow on the situation and pretend it's resolved when it's not. Second, it's okay to feel multiple things at once. You might feel relieved that they finally acknowledged it. You might feel angry that it took so long. You might feel sad about all the time you spent waiting. You might feel hopeful that they're capable of change. All of those feelings can coexist, and they're all valid. Third, I want you to have a very clear conversation about what repair actually looks like going forward. Don't just accept the apology and assume things will change. Ask them specifically what they're committing to. Are they going to therapy to work on their avoidant patterns? Are they going to check in with you regularly so they don't disappear during conflicts? Are they going to ask you for feedback if they notice themselves pulling away? What does follow-through actually look like? Fourth, Give yourself permission to stay cautious. One apology doesn't undo months of waiting and silence. One apology doesn't automatically restore your trust. Trust is rebuilt through consistent action over time. So receive the apology as a positive step, but understand that it's just a beginning, not an end. And fifth, most importantly, protect yourself. If this apology comes and things go back to normal avoidant patterns, you need to have already decided what that means for the relationship. You need to know what your breaking point is. Because sometimes an apology is just a way for the avoidant person to temporarily reduce their own discomfort, knowing they can go back to avoidance when the intensity passes. What it means for the relationship going forward. Now let's talk about what comes after the apology. Because this is where things get really real. This is where you have to decide not what they might become, but whether who they actually are right now is someone you can build a life with. There are basically three parts here. The first is that the apology catalyzes genuine change. They recognize their patterns. They commit to therapy or to working on themselves. They start consistently showing up differently in the relationship. They learn to stay present during conflicts instead of running. They learn to repair breaches instead of letting them fester. And the relationship actually improves. This is possible. It happens. But it requires them to do sustained work over time, not just a one-time apology. The second path is that things stay mostly the same. The apology happens, there's a period of reconnection. But then the avoidant patterns resume. They distance when things get hard, they go silent during conflicts. Maybe they apologize again later and the cycle repeats. You're back to waiting, back to managing their emotions, back to organizing your healing around their limitations. And you have to decide if you're willing to stay in a cycle like that. The third path is that the apology creates clarity, even if it doesn't create the change you hoped for. You see clearly that this person, despite good intentions, is not capable right now of being the partner you need. And that clarity gives you permission to leave. Sometimes an apology is less about reconciliation and more about closure. It's about getting the acknowledgement you needed so you can move forward without them. Only you can decide which path is yours. And I want to be clear, there's no wrong answer. Staying doesn't make you weak. Leaving doesn't make you cruel. Both are valid choices. The important thing is that you make the choice consciously, with clear eyes, understanding what you're signing up for. If you're staying, creating a workable dynamic. If you decide to stay, if you decide to give the relationship another chance after an apology, I want to talk about what you can do to protect yourself and create a more workable dynamic. First, stop managing their emotions. You are not responsible for helping them feel less ashamed or scared about the conflicts in your relationship. That's their work to do, ideally with a therapist. Your job is to express your needs and to take care of yourself. If they can't handle your needs being expressed, that's information you need. That's a sign that the relationship might not be sustainable as is. Second, communicate your needs directly and repeatedly. Don't assume that because they apologized once, they now understand what you need. Avoidant people often go back into their old patterns because they haven't actually internalized what their behavior costs the other person. So you need to keep expressing it. Not angrily or resentfully, but clearly. When you go silent, I feel abandoned. I need you to stay engaged even when things are hard. Third, set very clear boundaries about what you will and won't tolerate. And I'm not talking about harsh ultimatums. I'm talking about being honest about your own limits. I can't be in a relationship where conflicts are never discussed. I need us to repair breaches. If we can't do that, this doesn't work for me. And then follow through. If you set a boundary and they cross it, you need to actually enact the consequence you said you would. Otherwise, the boundary is meaningless. Fourth, continue to build a full life outside of this relationship. Don't put your eggs in this one basket. Have friendships, have hobbies, have goals that are just for you. Because if this relationship doesn't work out, you need to know that your life is still worth living. And honestly, being in a relationship with someone who is distant and unavailable, you need to have other sources of connection and support anyway. And fifth, get support for yourself. Therapy, coaching, trusted friends, a community, whatever you need to process this and to build your own emotional resilience. Because being with an avoidant person is emotionally taxing. You need external support to stay grounded and healthy. If you're leaving, honoring your own needs. Now, if you decide to leave, if you decide that even after an apology, or even without one, this relationship isn't what you need, I want to speak to that too. Leaving is not failure. Leaving is not giving up too easily. Leaving is not unforgiving or cruel. Leaving is sometimes the most honest, most healthy thing you can do, both for yourself and for them. Because sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the natural consequence of their behavior. Sometimes the thing that might actually jolt an avoidant person into growth is realizing that their avoidance has cost them someone they love. When you leave, I want you to be clear about why. Not in a punitive way, but in a clear, loving way. You might say something like, "I love you, and I understand that avoidance is how you protect yourself. But I can't be in a relationship with someone who won't stay engaged during conflicts. I can't be in a relationship where my needs for repair and acknowledgement go unmet. I'm leaving because I need to take care of myself." And I hope this clarity helps you see what your avoidance has cost you. I hope it catalyzes change, not just with me, but in how you relate to people in general. And then you need to follow through. That means staying out. It means not responding every time they reach out. It means not going back even if things get hard. It means trusting that leaving is the right choice even when you're lonely and you miss them. The deeper healing, I want to say something here that might be hard to hear. If you find yourself repeatedly in relationships with avoidant people, it's worth looking at that pattern. Not because there's anything wrong with you, but because there might be something about how you relate to others that's keeping you in situations where your needs aren't met. Sometimes people who attract avoidant partners do so because they learned somewhere along the way that their own needs weren't important, that other people's emotions and struggles were more important than their own well-being. They learned to be the caretaker, the supporter, the one who makes space for everyone else's stuff. And then they find themselves with someone avoidant, and suddenly they're doing it again. They're making space for the avoidant person's fear and shame. They're waiting for the avoidant person to be ready. They're organizing their own healing around someone else's timeline. If that resonates with you, I want to suggest that your deeper healing work is about learning that your needs are important, that your healing is not dependent on someone else's willingness to repair, that you can take care of yourself even while caring about another person, that setting boundaries is not selfish, that leaving is sometimes the most loving thing you can do for both of you. Because here's what I believe. I believe that the avoidant person in your life, underneath all that fear and shame, wants to be better. They want to be capable of deeper intimacy. They want to be someone who can apologize and repair, but they're so trapped in their own patterns that they can't get there alone. And you can't get them there for them. You can't love them enough, understand them enough, wait long enough for them to suddenly have the capacity to do what you're asking. They have to do that work themselves. They have to decide that their pattern isn't working. They have to decide that the cost of avoidance is higher than the cost of facing their fear. They have to choose to be vulnerable. And while they're making that journey, you have to be willing to take care of yourself. You have to be willing to say, "I love you, and I'm leaving because I can't wait here anymore." Sometimes that's what creates the space for them to change. Sometimes that's what shows them, in the most undeniable way, what their avoidance has cost them. You're worth regardless. I want to end where I want to start every conversation like this, with a truth that I want you to sit with and really let land in your body. You're worthy of an apology. You're worthy of someone saying to you, "I was wrong, I hurt you, and I'm sorry." That's not too much to ask. That's not needy. That's not demanding. That's a basic fundamental need in healthy relationships. And the fact that someone hasn't been able to give that to you doesn't mean you're not worth giving it to. And if they never apologize, if they continue to avoid, if they choose to stay in their pattern rather than move toward you, that's not a reflection of your worth either. That's a reflection of their limitations, of their struggle, of their inability to do what you need. And you don't have to accept that. You don't have to make peace with that. You can grieve it. You can acknowledge how much you wanted something different. And you can decide that you're going to move forward anyway. Because here's what I know about you. I know that you've been hurt. I know that you've been waiting. I know that you've been strong enough to hold space for someone else's fear while your own pain goes unacknowledged. And that strength, that capacity, that deep emotional intelligence, that's something to be so proud of. But it's time to redirect it. It's time to be strong for yourself. It's time to hold space for your own healing. It's time to demand, not ask, but demand, that the people in your life meet you with the same care and consideration you've been extending to them. And if they can't, it's time to step back. Not out of cruelty, not out of revenge, but out of self-respect, out of a deep, abiding recognition that you are worth the effort, that you are worth the apology. The silence you've been sitting in, that doesn't define you. The hurt you've experienced, that doesn't diminish you. The fact that someone couldn't show up the way you needed them to, that doesn't say anything about your lovability or your value. It says something about them. It says something about their capacity and their limitations in that moment. And you get to decide what you do with that information. You get to decide whether you're willing to wait for them to grow. You get to decide whether their potential is more important than your peace right now. You get to decide whether you're going to continue to make space for them or whether you're going to make space for yourself instead. What I hope for you is that you choose yourself. What I hope for you is that you wake up tomorrow and you decide that your healing is important, that your peace is important, that your needs are important, and you start moving toward those things with or without an apology, with or without acknowledgement from anyone else, because you already know deep down what happened. You already know the impact of their actions. You already know what you needed and didn't receive. And you can honor that truth while also choosing to move forward. You can acknowledge the pain while also choosing to stop waiting. You can grieve what you wanted while also building something better for yourself. You are worthy. You have always been worthy, and your worth doesn't depend on anyone else recognizing it. Not your avoidant partner, not anyone. Your worth is intrinsic. It's built in. It's part of who you are. And I want you to start living like you believe that. Because the world needs you. The people in your life who do show up for you, they need you. And most importantly, you need you. You deserve peace. And that peace is waiting for you on the other side of this waiting. So I hope you choose to move toward it.